The purpose of this video is to give a brief overview of Catholic social teaching. Now, we'll be developing these ideas over the course of the next year or so, but this is meant to give you a broad foundation that will allow you to have a basic understanding of what's going on in Catholic social teaching, or as we'll abbreviate it here, CST. Now, the first question, of course, that you might be asking yourself is, what exactly are we doing studying Catholic social thought in a university? Isn't this something perhaps that we should be doing at churches or someplace else? And of course, you'll see many churches doing that. But there's this quote from Ex Corde Ecclesiae that calls universities and colleges to deal with this. So I'm going to pause for about 30 seconds and just let you read this quote because I think it's pretty important. Now, the key here, of course, is that Catholic social thought, as the Church understands, is actually a fundamental to the mission of a Catholic university. That is, we're here not just to make a contribution to the lives of our students, but also to make contributions to the local, national, and even international context in which we operate. So this is fundamental to how the Catholic Church understands the mission of a Catholic university. Now, from a Catholic perspective, Catholic social thought isn't new, but is in fact really based on the ministry of Jesus. In fact, this is based on his own description of his ministry. So again, let me give you time just to read this really important passage from Luke 4, where Jesus talks about exactly what he's up to in his ministry. So Catholic social teaching is in some ways new, as we'll see, since we really demarcate the beginning of it in 1891, but it's also in some sense old in the sense that Christians have been thinking about these issues since Jesus proclaimed that his ministry was meant to actually be shaped by attending to the care of the poor, the needy, and so on. Now, as I just mentioned, we really think of modern Catholic social teaching as beginning in 1891, but prior to 1891, there were Christian theologians who quite often thought about these questions. So, for instance, just war theory, which is something that Catholic social teaching deals with, is developed by Augustine. Aquinas, for instance, was interested in questions of usury and income and so on, and poverty. So Christians have all along been interested in these issues, but I think it would still be fair to say that for the most part, morality was really considered as primarily an individual aspect, whether one had a particular set of virtues that one was supposed to have and do certain sort of acts. And that in 1891, things changed a little bit. Here, Pope Leo XIII was responding to changes in the Industrial Revolution, to Marxism, and to the growth of unrestrained capitalism. And he wrote this very famous papal encyclical, Rerum Novarum, also called On the Condition of Labor, where he begins to deal with these issues. And he lays out in this encyclical some of the basic foundational ideas of Catholic social thought, again, drawing on people who had written before him, including Aquinas. He uses, for instance, one of Aquinas' natural law arguments. But 1891 is really considered the beginning of modern Catholic social teaching. Now, after Leo XIII, a series of papal encyclicals were established, written over the course of the next 120 some odd years. And you'll also see that those are done by local bishops' synods and other organizations. So there's some, for instance, that have been written in the United States that have been very important for Catholic understanding in the United States, but primarily they're international in scope. That is, they really are meant to deal with something that Christians all over the world can think about as they go on. Now, I've talked about Catholic social teaching as if I've know what it is, but let me just give you some ideas of what Catholic social teaching is all about, if you will, kind of moving towards a definition. One way of thinking about it is really a set of coherent teachings here, and you see this quote, that helps Christians deal with life in relationship with other people. That is, it addresses primarily social concerns. I'll give you a list of that on the next slide. Or another way of thinking about it, and I've seen this in a couple places, is it's faith and love, seeking justice. But if I were to really have to give you a definition in my own words, I would really think it's about how to be moral in community and as a community. That is, how does one create a society that's just, that attends to not just those at the top, in the middle, but in the bottom of society, so that everybody has, in some sense, what's due to them as a child of God. So, because these address social concerns, you can see here this wide list of topics that are addressed in Catholic social teaching, everything from the nation state to sexuality, immigration, life and war. And if you note, really, all these are about things where we relate to other people directly, where justice becomes important. And they deal with these public questions then of justice and morality. So, for instance, as one person has put it, it's the idea of church as the servant of humanity. So it really is broken into two areas. One we would think of as principles and guidelines. These are oriented towards a common good. So what you have is a set of principles and guidelines that say, here's some things that need to be done in a positive way, things that we think are good, that we need to pursue for the common good, not just the good of the individual, but the good of the individual in his community or her community, within the state, the nation, or the international community. So that the questions one begins to ask just aren't, is this policy good for me, but is this policy good for my neighbor? Is it good for my neighbor in China, if you will? Now, there's also rules that deal with preventing evil. Most of us are probably familiar with these, with the ideas of abortion and euthanasia, but those are actually fewer and far between compared to the principles and guidelines that say, here are some things that we want to do towards achieving goods. That's really what the most of the focus on Catholic social teaching is, but of course there are situations where evil needs to be prevented. Now, what Catholic social teaching is not is a specific political program. In fact, in one way of thinking about this is there's something in here for everybody to like, and there's something in Catholic social teaching that challenges everybody. It can make you very uncomfortable, whether you're on the left or the right politically. It's in that sense pre-political because the principles are there, and they ask questions of us. How we actually apply those requires a judgment on how to achieve the specific goals, how to relieve the poverty and suffering of people, how to grow and improve family life, how to have dignified work for people, and so on. In fact, you'll see people from both ends of the political spectrum use Catholic social teaching. We've seen Paul Ryan do that in the last presidential election, and Ted Kennedy, to take the other extreme, also used Catholic social teaching as a basis of some of his ideas. So it's something that can be used on both sides. Now, it is also not as a strictly philosophical social ethics. Now, there's certainly some important philosophical ideas in Catholic social teaching, and it can certainly be understood as a contribution to philosophical ethics. And you'll see, again, things like natural law arguments and so on being made in those ideas. But at its root is primarily theological. So what that means is there's these important theological assumptions that Catholics make that form this. One is that justice is fulfilled by love. Justice alone sometimes can end up being coercive and authoritarian, but love provides room for mercy and sacrifice. So it shapes our idea of justice in a different way. A second theological assumption is that humans are made in the image of God, the Imago Dei. And this brings with it two important aspects. One, that means that all humans, as children of God, have inherent dignity to them, and so therefore should be treated with such dignity. Or another way of putting it is when we look on the face of anybody who's suffering or any of our neighbors, we should see the face of God or the face of Christ. It also means that human beings are given the gift of being agents, of participating in God's own work of justice, and of creating a more just society, the kingdom of God, if you will. And so humans have an important responsibility to create a more just society. And then finally, another key theological assumption here is that humans are called to love their neighbor. Now, this love for neighbor is rooted in a love for God, but fundamentally, it's not just justice, it's justice fulfilled by love for one's neighbor. Catholic social teaching is often called the Church's best-kept secret. It's something that's been around for 130 years, and a lot of Catholics and Christians aren't aware of it. But what's lovely about it is it's a coherent body of teaching that's been growing over the course of time, developing and blooming, if you will. And it's really quite beautiful if you begin to study it and be challenged by it. It's a way of theologically reflecting then on how we live life in community. It's got these principles and guidelines, and it's shaped by love. Now, we'll be exploring all of these in more depth over the course of the next year, but I hope this gives you a basic overview of some of the things that are encompassed by Catholic social teaching, some of the principles that we'll deal with, and I hope this has been helpful.